Joe Biden had a speech during the Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony that didn't exactly go well for him, and we'll watch it, and this will kind of lead us into what's been going on with Israel-Palestine. So let's just start here.
Thank you. Thank you, Zen. Please. Thank you, Stu Eisenstadt, for that introduction, for your leadership in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. You're a true scholar and statesman and a dear friend. Speaker Johnson, Leader Jeffries, members of Congress, and especially the survivors of the Holocaust. My mother here, she'd look at you and say, God love you all. God love you all. Abe Foxman and all other survivors who embody absolute courage and dignity and grace are here as well. During these sacred days of remembrance, we grieve, we give voice to the 6 million Jews who were systematically targeted and murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators during World War II. We honor the memory of victims, the pain of survivors, the bravery of heroes who stood up to Hitler's unspeakable evil, and we recommit to heading and heeding the lessons that one of the darkest chapters in human history, to revitalize and realize the responsibility of never again. Never again, simply translated for me, means never forget.
I mean, that's just a weird way to start off. Never again is a weird way of saying, like, for me, him saying never again simply translates to me to never forget. Like, yeah, no shit. Also, never again, but unless it doesn't happen, unless it happens to Palestinians, like, they're being systematically targeted by the Israeli state. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, like, you might be asking, what does this have to do with Israel-Palestine? Well, of course he does mention this. Biden's whole stance on this conflict going on, Israel's genocide of Palestinians, has very much been in support of Israel, despite all, he's talking bad about Benjamin Netanyahu behind the scenes. He's been calling him bad words. Despite that, in public, to the public eye, he's been very much in support of them. He's obviously going to bring this up when he's talking about the Holocaust, because when he's very much on the side of a state that very much wants people to see it as like a nation that represents all Jewish people, despite the fact that there are many Jewish people who aren't in support of Israel, there are many Jewish people who aren't Zionists, he's going to bring this up.
Never forget. Never forgetting means we must keep telling the story. We must keep teaching the truth. We must keep teaching our children and our grandchildren. And the truth is, we're at risk of people not knowing the truth. That's why growing up, my dad taught me and my siblings about the horrors of the Shoah at our family dinner table. That's why I visited Yad Vashem with my family as a senator, as vice president, as president. And that's why I took my grandchildren to Dachau, so they could see and bear witness to the perils of indifference, the complicity of silence in the face of evil that they knew was happening. Germany, 1933. Hitler and his Nazi party rise to power by rekindling one of the world's oldest forms of prejudice and hate, anti-Semitism. His rule didn't begin with mass murder. It started slowly across economic, political, social, and cultural life. Propaganda demonizing Jews, boycotts of Jewish businesses, synagogues defaced with swastikas, harassment of Jews in the street and in the schools, anti-Semitic demonstrations, pogroms, organized riots. With the indifference of the world, Hitler knew he could expand his reign of terror by eliminating Jews from Germany, to annihilate Jews across Europe through genocide the Nazis called the final solution. Concentration camps, gas chambers, mass shootings. By the time the war ended, 6 million Jews, 1 out of every 3 Jews in the entire world, were murdered. This ancient hatred of Jews didn't begin with the Holocaust. It didn't end with the Holocaust either, or even after our victory in World War II. This hatred continues to lie deep in the hearts of too many people in the world, and requires our continued vigilance and outspokenness. That hatred was brought to life on October 7th in 2023. On the sacred Jewish holiday, the terrorist group Hamas unleashed the deadliest day of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Driven by ancient desire to wipe out the Jewish people off the face of the earth.
Jesus Christ. That's something that a lot of people have been pointing out with this. When he says, by an ancient desire to wipe out Jewish people, it's just incredibly Islamophobic. Just like incredibly racist to Muslim, to like Palestinians and Muslims in general. Like what happened on October 7th is not the same thing that Nazi Germany did. It's not. Comparing like Palestinians or Hamas to the Third Reich is insane. The Third Reich was not like a apartheid, was not under like an apartheid state by the Jewish people who lived in Germany. What happened with October 7th is that the state of Israel oppressed these people, kept them in an open-air prison, or with the West Bank, allowed settlers to move into their house and just kick them out. And it was them fighting back. It was the oppressed fighting back. The Germans were not oppressed by Jewish people. That's what a lot of conspiracy theories that led up to the Holocaust wanted the Germans to believe, which wasn't true. But with Israel-Palestine, it's very much true that these people were treated inhumanely. They were kept in an open-air prison. It's a lot different. Trying to compare these, and like when he mentions in his like list of ways that Nazi Germany spread anti-Semitism with like boycotts of Jewish businesses and stuff like that. Some of those examples, I feel like he was also trying to take shots at some of like the student protesters and people who have been protesting against, or at least boycotting against companies that do support Israel. And it's just disgusting, like seeing the student protesters at Columbia, UCLA, and a bunch of colleges across the nation, and he's just comparing all of them to Nazis. Just absolutely disgusting.
Over 1,200 innocent people, babies, parents, grandparents, slaughtered in their kibbutz, massacred at a music festival, brutally raped, mutilated, and sexually assaulted. Thousands more carrying wounds, bullets and shrapnel from the memory of that terrible day they endured. Hundreds taken hostage, including survivors of the Shoah. Now, here we are, not 75 years later, but just 7.5 months later, and people are already forgetting. They're already forgetting.
First of all, they're not forgetting. It's because more people are getting slaughtered. It's not the Israeli people, it's Palestinians. That's why. Just when something, like, yes, people should be allowed to mourn the people they lost or the people who are taken hostage, but they're not able to because they're seeing another group of people being slaughtered by the mass, way more compared to what happened on October 7th. And even the family members, the friends of people who were taken hostage, can't mourn their people who were taken away from them because the Israeli government, despite their wishes, continues to bomb Palestine, continues to bomb Palestinians, saying that they're doing it to get rid of Hamas, despite the fact that those strikes, their missions to go in, are also killing the hostages. And the families and friends of these hostages know that, and they're trying to protest against that, and they're just not listening. They don't get a chance to forget. They don't get a chance to mourn because of what Israel is doing and what you have been supporting, at least somewhat till recently, but even then, it's way too late at this point. It's still very cowardly of him to say this at a Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony despite the fact that there is also a Holocaust going on of the Palestinians, and he more than likely won't mention that at all, or just will mention it in passing.
That Hamas unleashed this terror. It was Hamas that brutalized Israelis. It was Hamas who took and continues to hold hostages.
That Israel bombs.
I have not forgotten, nor have you, and we will not forget. And as Jews around the world still cope with the atrocities and trauma of that day and its aftermath, we've seen a ferocious surge of anti-Semitism in America and around the world. Vicious propaganda on social media. Jews forced to keep their hide, their keepers under baseball hats, tuck their Jewish stars into their shirts. On college campuses, Jewish students blocked, harassed, attacked.
Yeah. So, I shouldn't have to say, like, I've said this multiple times. There's going to be bad faith actors when it comes to pro-Palestine protests. There are people who are anti-Semitic who use those examples to spread their anti-Semitism. Usually they are taken care of by the protesters themselves, because a large amount of them, especially the student protesters at UCLA and Columbia, are mostly organized by groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a Jewish group. Shouldn't have to, it's just so, it's like, it's one thing for like Asmongold to say something like this. It's one thing for some right-wing, shill to say something like this. But when is the President of the United States, someone who is supposed to be on the left, and he's saying stuff like this? It's disgusting. Like, this is something you would probably expect from like Trump or like a right-wing politician who appears on Fox News a lot, because that's the type of propaganda they spread. And this is our best choice, by the way, for the election. This is our choice. Yeah, we're screwed.
While walking to class, anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic posters, slogans calling for the annihilation of Israel, the world's only Jewish state. Too many people denying, downplaying, rationalizing, ignoring the horrors of the Holocaust.
People are not ignoring the horrors of the Holocaust. They've been bringing them up in relation to what's been happening to Palestinians because it's extremely similar. Nobody's ignoring or forgetting. Just because it's not happening to Jewish people doesn't make it any less of a Holocaust, doesn't make it any less of a genocide.
On October 7th, including Hamas's appalling use of sexual violence to torture and terrorize Jews. It's absolutely despicable, and it must stop. Silence.
Yeah, because Israel hasn't done any sort of sexual violence, which I'm not saying it's right. The attack on October 7th, what Hamas did, is completely disgusting. But when you look at what happened to what happened afterwards, but one is very terrible. The other one is way more terrible in terms of numbers, in terms of destruction to property, in terms of collective punishment. Palestine is basically in famine right now. It is in famine. The fact that Israel has been blocking aid, has been blocking food getting in, has caused it that people aren't getting the right amount of food that they need. And it's resulted in a famine. Yes, that's not going to get brought up, huh?
Silence and denial can hide much, but it can erase nothing. Some injustices are so heinous, so horrific, so grievous, they cannot be buried, no matter how hard people try. In my view, a major lesson of the Holocaust is, as mentioned earlier, was not inevitable. We know hate never goes away, it only hides. And given a little oxygen, it comes out from under the rocks. But we also know what stops hate. One thing, all of us. The late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs described anti-Semitism as a virus that survived and mutated over time. Together, we cannot continue to let that happen. We have to remember, our basic principles as a nation. We have an obligation. We have an obligation to learn the lessons of history so we don't surrender our future to the horrors of the past. We must give hate no safe harbor against anyone. Anyone. From the very founding, our very founding, Jewish Americans, who represent only about 2% of the U.S. population, have helped lead the cause of freedom for everyone in our nation. From that experience, we know scapegoating and demonizing any minority is a threat to every minority and the very foundation of our democracy. So in moments like this, we have to put these principles that we're talking about into action. I understand people have strong beliefs and deep convictions about the world. In America, we respect and protect the fundamental right to free speech, to debate and disagree, to protest peacefully, and make our voices heard. I understand that's America, but there is no place on any campus in America, any place in America, for anti-Semitism or hate speech or threats of violence of any kind.
Yeah, because the student protesters were the ones who were saying threats of violence, not the counter-protesters. Not that at all, because they, it's the student protesters, because they wouldn't let a bad faith Zionist actor get to class. Even though he wasn't trying to get to class, he was actually trying to break into the encampment. But apparently that's a threat of violence. But despite the fact that they never touched him at all, that they never laid a finger on him. That's the only example you could really point to as substantial, even though, again, it's a Zionist actor who's there in bad faith, lying, saying that they're blocking his way to class when he was trying to get into the encampment. This is the guy that we're supposed to, vote for, just so Donald Trump doesn't get in. But at this point, it's just what's the difference? I don't even know if I can keep watching. We're just gonna move on to the next thing. He has paused military aid to Israel, at least for the time being. He has essentially paused military aid to Israel, which isn't going very well with Benjamin Netanyahu, but we'll just read this real quick. Biden pauses bomb shipments to Israel over humanitarian concerns in Gaza. Now, this was, I believe, 3 days ago now. The Biden administration has paused the shipment of 3,500 bombs to Israel over concerns that they could be used in a major military operation in Rafah, where more than 1 million refugees have been sheltering, a senior U.S. official said, which they've already started assaulting at this point. And this is kind of where we're at with this. They have started their assault on Rafah. There was an article that I saw just a few hours ago where they're already ordering new evacuations as they're planning to expand their offense. Defense Attorney Lloyd Austin confirmed the pause at a Senate hearing on Wednesday. We have assessed the situation. We have paused one shipment of high payload munitions, he said. We not made a final determination on how to proceed with that shipment. The administration began a review of some weapons transfers to Israel last month, a senior U.S. official said. The president then paused a shipment of 1,800 2,000-pound bombs and 1,700 500-pound bombs last week, as Israel ramped up plans for a ground invasion of the southern Gaza city. Hamas fighters and Israeli troopers battled on Wednesday on the outskirts of Rafah. President Joe Biden had been grappling with a pledge to support Israel militarily, no matter what, and concerns that the U.S. ally is not doing enough to protect civilian lives in Gaza. The State Department was due to issue a report to Congress on Wednesday assessing Israel's treatment of civilians in its war against Hamas, before acknowledging that it was likely to miss the self-imposed deadline by a day or more, of course. I highly doubt they were actually looking that into it. Democrat lawmakers have pushed the Biden administration to obtain fresh assurances the ally is not violating U.S. policy and international humanitarian law in Gaza, so the administration evaluates its military support in Israel, which if they were actually evaluating what they were doing, they would not be supporting them. But I think we just kind of saw with this speech that he is more than willing to glaze over certain things that Israel has been doing. This news flies in the face of assurances provided regarding the timely delivery of security assistance to Israel. The White House reiterated on Tuesday that Biden's support for Israel is ironclad, and the president has himself said there is no red line over which he would cut off all aid to Israel. So yeah, he's even saying himself, like, no matter what they do, I'll still support them. I mean, this would say otherwise, the fact that he is, pausing the shipment, but still, he's just pausing it. He could just resume it if he wanted to. He has paused the shipment, and Netanyahu and other Israeli officials are just throwing a hissy fit about it. Literally, at the slightest pushback, the slightest ounce of pushback from the U.S. government, from the president himself, they are throwing a giant fucking hissy fit. Now, this is over something different. This Israeli ambassador. We'll get back to that. But here we have Benjamin Netanyahu himself. Israel will stand alone. Israel will stand alone. Netanyahu signals what he thinks of Biden's Rafah red line. Benjamin Netanyahu uses a day-old clip of a speech in which he vowed Israel will not bow to international pressure on the war with Hamas following Joe Biden's ultimatum regarding U.S. military aid. Today we again confront enemies bent on our destruction, Netanyahu said during the speech he gave at a Holocaust Remembrance Day event in Jerusalem days ago. I say to the leaders of the world, no amount of pressure, no decision from international forum will stop Israel from defending itself. Yeah. Literally just saying to their face, like, we don't care what you guys do, we're still going to do this. We don't care. Because they're not doing anything. They're not enforcing international law, which has always been something that's incredibly difficult to do because there's no, like, international police or military. But with this case, they are literally basically an agent of the U.S. And the U.S. is doing nothing to stop them. And it's not like other world leaders could just pressure U.S. to do something. Well, I feel like they can, but they're probably not going to. But, like, the U.S. is, like, the world superpower. So you have this big superpower and its attack dog, and it just refuses to keep that attack dog on a leash. Like, it will shake its finger at it, but it will never keep it in line. It chose not to provide a new statement hours after Biden announced he would halt offensive military aid transfers to Israel if they carried out a full ground invasion of Rafah, a Gaza city among its southern border with Egypt, where more than 1 million Palestinians are sheltering after fleeing their homes in the war. Which they have, like I said before, they have started their invasion, basically leading us to, a new trail of tears, literally just pushing them out of Gaza, pushing them into Egypt. I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone in Rafah yet, they have now. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities that deal with that problem, Biden said in a CNN interview. The United States is among a large group of countries that have publicly opposed an Israel ground invasion of Rafah due to the possibility it could result in a significant number of civilian casualties and destroying the humanitarian aid infrastructure international entities have set up in the area for refugees. Days ago, Israeli forces issued an evacuation order for parts of Rafah and have begun limited ground operations there. Israel reaction to Biden ultimatum. Israel National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, a far-right member of Netanyahu's governing coalition, posted on social media, Hamas loves Biden with a heart emoji. He's fucking insane. Ben-Gvir is like an insane dumbass. Ben-Gvir has largely been critical of the U.S. defense of Palestinian civilians and urged Israeli forces to go ahead into Rafah unencumbered. Yeah, this is just absolutely disgusting. And apparently, I should probably look this up. And Ben Shapiro, being the disgusting man he is, has been complaining about it. Jesus, Biden sides with Satan?
So there's a very famous
Okay, so yeah, we're probably not gonna watch this entire thing. Jesus Christ.
story about young Joe Biden, Senator Joe Biden. This is a story from the early 80s. Apparently, in June 1982, Joe Biden was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The dude's been in the Senate since Cato was in the Senate. And he got into a clash with the Prime Minister of Israel at the time, Menachem Begin. At the time, Israel was going into Lebanon in order to attempt to extirpate terrorism that was coming from southern Lebanon. Again, nothing changes when it comes to the Middle East. And Joe Biden was very angry at Menachem Begin. He lectured Menachem Begin over Israeli settlements. And Menachem Begin, who his entire family was effectively murdered in the Holocaust, and then he ended up moving to Israel and becoming an underground fighter against the British in an attempt to establish.
So this guy, Menachem Begin, the guy that Ben says was an underground freedom fighter, was actually a part of a bombing of a King David hotel. He calls him an underground freedom fighter, but also calls Palestinians terrorists. The bombing of the King David Hotel occurred in July 1946, and some saw it as a pivotal moment in recent Middle East history. The King David Hotel was the site of the British military command in Palestine. It also served as the headquarters of the British Criminal Investigation Division. The bombing of the hotel galvanized the British into realizing that their time in Palestine was coming to an end. On July 29, 1946, the British unexpectedly entered the premises of the Jewish Agency and took away with them a large number of documents, some of which were deemed to be sensitive. All the documents were taken to the King David Hotel, where they were assessed by intelligence analysts. At around the same time, the British arrested 2,500 Jews in Palestine. Irgun, a Jewish secret organization deemed to be a terrorist group by the British, decided to target the hotel for vengeance and also a way of destroying the documents that had been taken by the British. The leader, Menachem Begin, claimed that Irgun saw the hotel solely as a military building and therefore a legitimate target. So it was only a military building because they deemed it that way, despite the fact that it was a hotel. And I believe there were actually civilians killed. The British did not evacuate the hospital, and the bombing killed 91 people and injured 45. Ironically, few people in the hotel itself were killed, and Jews were among the casualties. So they killed their own people to kill these British people and destroy the documents that they took. So they were more than willing to sacrifice their own people. But that's the guy that Ben sees as an underground freedom fighter.
Israel was going into Lebanon in order to attempt to extirpate terrorism that was coming from southern Lebanon. Again, nothing changes when it comes to the Middle East. And Joe Biden was very angry at Menachem Begin. He lectured Menachem Begin over Israeli settlements. And Menachem Begin, who his entire family was effectively murdered in the Holocaust, and then he ended up moving to Israel and becoming an underground fighter against the British in an attempt to establish the state of Israel. And then he was out in the political wilderness for a long time, finally became prime minister of Israel. And this is a very famous anecdote. Apparently, he then turned to Joe Biden and he said, "Don't threaten us with cutting off aid to give up our principles." He said, "I'm not a Jew with trembling knees." And then he continued, quote, "I'm a proud Jew with 3,700 years of civilized history. Nobody came to our aid when we were dying in the gas chambers and ovens. Nobody came to our aid when we were striving to create our country. We paid for it. We fought for it. We died for it. We will stand by our principles. We will defend them. And when necessary, we will die for them again, with or without your aid." Now, this story is not about Menachem Begin. This story is about Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a coward. Joe Biden is a terrible, terrible voice when it comes to foreign policy, and he always has been. There's a reason that former Obama Defense Secretary Robert Gates said that Joe Biden had literally never been correct on foreign policy in his entire life.
I mean, yeah, he still supports Israel. He's not great with foreign policy, but I don't think that's what Ben thinks. I think Ben thinks that he's not going far enough, seeing how this chapter of this video is called Biden Signs with Satan. Ben Shapiro is just such a wormy little shit. Also, that whole thing with Menachem Begin saying like, "Oh, we established this country, by misplacing and murdering Palestinians."
And that is true. Joe Biden has a unique capacity to screw up when it comes to foreign policy. Joe Biden is weak-kneed. Joe Biden is so weak that he brags about being the only member of the Obama administration to oppose the bin Laden raid. That's how weak Joe Biden is. Well, now Joe Biden is showing his neck to Hamas. And when you talk about unjustifiable acts on every possible level, moral, political, pragmatic, none of it makes any sense. On the moral level, Hamas is a terrorist group that is currently holding 5 Americans. There are 5 Americans who are being held in terror tunnels by Yahya Sinwar and his group of barbaric thugs. Their names, I know that Joe Biden doesn't mention their names very often,
Are you also going to mention the Americans who were killed by Israel after they got bombed for, trying to provide humanitarian aid to Palestinians? Are you going to mention them at all?
He will talk about Brittany Griner until the cows come home. But when it comes to 5 Americans who happen to be Jewish who are being held by Hamas in terror tunnels.
This is also insane because we literally just saw how Biden speaks on this whole situation. The way that he spoke at that Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony is the way that he's been talking about it this entire time. So when Ben makes this video, and this is how he talks about Biden. He talks about Biden as if he's this pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian president who will do anything for the Palestinians. He's not. We have seen it with our own eyes and ears. We have listened to it with our own ears.
Then he won't mention their names. He'll take the occasional photo op with their relatives and pretend that he's going to stand by them, but as we'll learn in a moment, he ain't standing by nobody. Their names are Eden Alexander, who is 19 years old, Omer Nutra, who is 22, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who is...
This is also stupid because Ben doesn't care about these people either. I honestly don't. He just wants people to die. He just wants the Palestinians to be slaughtered. He's using these hostages the same way that Israel does as an excuse. Because if Ben actually cared about the hostages, he wouldn't be using them to spread his propaganda. He would be critiquing Israel of hey, don't bomb them. Try to get them. And here's the thing. If Israel really wanted to get these hostages, they would come to the table with Hamas and work out a deal, which we have now learned they refuse to do. Hamas has literally said, we will give you these hostages as long as you give us some of your prisoners, some of your hostages of our people, because Israel has a long history of wrongfully prosecuting Palestinians for the slightest thing and throwing them into prisons. It's hey, you give us our people back, and we'll give you your hostages back. And Israel refuses. It's a perfectly good deal. They refuse to budge even a little bit. It's a win-win for everyone involved, and they refuse.
23, Sagi Dekel-Chen.
No, this guy's going to complain that we're not killing enough Palestinians.
Who is 35, and Keith Siegel, who is 64. They're currently being held, and Joe Biden does not give 2 good damns about any of those people. On a moral level, Joe Biden attempting to preserve Hamas in Rafah is sick. On a political level, it is political malpractice. The American people do not like Hamas. The American people do not like this conflict, but they like Hamas even less than they like this conflict. They would like to see Israel finish this. The American people are tired of watching this war go on, wherein Israel is supposed to take it super slow. It never ends. What America likes are wars that are short. America likes wars that are victorious. And those are things Joe Biden has never been involved in. And when it comes to the pragmatic, what Joe Biden is doing right now is the least pragmatic thing I've ever seen a politician do on foreign policy. He has created an entire incentive structure for Hamas to walk away from the table. He has created an incentive structure for...
Literally, Israel has walked away from the table. He can't... Jesus, he's such a dumbass. He's such a literal fucking dumbass. Let's just keep going. I'm not going to waste my time on this useless sack of meat. Because that's all he's good for. It's just holding meat together in some loose bag of skin. And then we get to this. Because if you want to talk about the horrors of war, holding people in gruel situations, we now have Israeli whistleblowers who are detailing the abuse of Palestinians in shadowy detention center. Or, a concentration camp, one would say. So let's see from right here. This is a CNN. These are Israeli whistleblowers. Strapped down, blindfolded, held in diapers. Israeli whistleblowers detail abuse of Palestinians in shadowy detention center. Now there is a video here.
It's a place the Israeli military doesn't want us to see.
How many Palestinians are in there right now?
Who are you? Give me please now. Hang on, what is it that you want? Can I have my card?
But CNN has gained exclusive evidence of Palestinian prisoner abuse from multiple Israeli whistleblowers. At the Sedi Taman facility in southern Israel, we joined human rights activists amid growing public concern for the detainees being held inside. This is a protest by Israeli citizens outside a detention centre close to Gaza, where we know hundreds of Palestinians have been held. You can see it's a closed military facility. It's behind a barbed wire fence. We're not permitted access. And there's hostility from passers-by.
Oh yeah, that was the sign that this guy held. That's something that actually happened. One died after they put the electrical stick up his anus. This is the type of like torture they've been putting a lot of Palestinians through. And I mentioned before with sexual violence that Biden brought up when it came to what Hamas did to the people on October 7th. There has been details of sexual abuse that have gone down that have happened to Palestinians in these Israeli prisons, in these Israeli camps. So yeah, saying like one side is only doing sexual violence while completely omitting the sexual violence that another side is doing is extremely terrible.
And there's hostility from passers-by. We just had somebody drive past in a car and they shouted out to us in Hebrew, "You're defending murderers."
No.
You're defending, what do you,
no,
how do you
no.
answer that
We're defending basic human rights.
And eyewitnesses are now speaking out.
A male soldier took our hijabs and they pinched us and touched our bodies. They asked us to drink from the toilet and made the dogs attack us. Like, these are all real accounts that they're bringing up.
Away from the military facility, near the beaches of Tel Aviv, one young Israeli army reservist agreed to speak about scores of detainees at Sedi Taman. He says are kept in cages or pens, constantly shackled and blindfolded, many for weeks on end. We've hidden his identity and voice to shield him from prosecution.
We were told they are not allowed to move and must sit upright. They're not allowed to talk or peek under their blindfolds.
And what happened if they did do that? What kind of punishments were meted out?
We were allowed to pick out problematic people and punish them, having them stand with their hands above their heads for an unlimited time. If they didn't keep their hands up, we could zip tie them to the fence.
The Israeli military says detainees are handcuffed based on their risk level and health status. But the account tallies with photographic evidence obtained by CNN of Palestinian detainees inside Sedi Taman, and with hand and wrist injuries shown to CNN by dozens of Palestinians released back into Gaza. I was zip-tied and blindfolded, says this former detainee, and tortured in a way I never imagined. One source telling us the restraints were so tight they had to amputate a man's hand.
The view that I've heard expressed is that, how do you think Israeli hostages are treated by Hamas?
This sentiment was voiced in the facility, but I think that if Hamas is so abominable, which I agree with, then why use Hamas as a bar? It's a descent into dehumanization.
Yeah, it's just, even this guy who is a part of like the Israeli force, like, and he's right in that circumstance. Like, if you believe that what Hamas is doing to their hostages is completely wrong and inhumane, why are you doing the same thing? You shouldn't be using them as a bar. You should be, if you believe yourself to be this just cause, this better force, you should be acting like it. And they're not. They're treating them like animals.
A descent that's accelerated since the rampage by Hamas on October the 7th last year. The killing and abduction to Gaza of hundreds of Israelis provoked outrage and a brutal response. Amid Israel's wrath, tens of thousands of Palestinians have been killed.
Yeah, do you think they just found him like this? Without their clothes? No. They forced them to do this.
And thousands detained for interrogation. Transported to facilities like Seder Taman, where one Israeli guard now tells CNN prisoners are routinely beaten. We've hidden his identity and voice too.
You can take them out and hit them maybe 4 or 5 times with a club. It's not down in the face, so you don't see blood. The detainees lie belly down, being hit and kicked, people screaming and dogs barking at them. It's terrifying. Some detainees are taken away and beaten really hard, so bones and teeth are broken.
So you saw people who were subject to these beatings, who had their bones broken and who had their teeth broken?
Yes, it's a practice which commanders know about. They want intelligence, but they also want revenge and punishment for what happened on October 7th.
The Israeli military hasn't approved CNN's requests for access to Sedi Taman. But at the gates of the facility, we challenged the Israeli guards.
How many Palestinians are in there right now?
We don't know the answer.
Do you know if they're being handcuffed? Are they being blindfolded?
No.
This is a facility.
As we leave, masked soldiers approach.
Hello, how are you? I'm filming this place.
It's
Of the army.
Oh, so who are you guys? I'm from CNN.
Give me please.
Tried to take our cameras.
Give me please now. Give me please now.
Hang on, what is it that you want? My camera or my card?
Then order us to leave.
Jesus Christ. Like, just showing how hard they are trying to hide all this. Like, they're not answering basic questions, not answering, like, asking if they're being handcuffed or blindfolded is a basic question. Or how many Palestinians there are in there. And then, literally, when they are leaving, going up to them and harassing them, when they're already on their way out, like, yeah, this is obviously a very shady look.
Well, we're driving now to meet one Israeli with personal experience of the Sedi Taman facility. It's experience that he says has left him shocked at the condition and the medical treatment of Palestinian detainees there. Hello.
He told us he treated Palestinian detainees with gunshot wounds fresh from the war zone in Gaza, but was appalled at the lack of equipment and expertise.
The problem is, Gazans who are brought in are labeled as terrorists, and it is very popular opinion over here that terrorists deserve to die, so they do not deserve the same medical care as everyone else.
Satellite imagery obtained by CNN shows how the Sedi Taman facility was expanded after the October 7th attacks, with detention facilities and makeshift medical bays being added after public hospitals in Israel refused to treat injured Gazan suspects. Eyewitness accounts describe a field hospital with 15 to 20 patients, virtually naked and blindfolded, with hands and feet shackled to their beds and wearing diapers. One eyewitness told CNN painful procedures were carried out by underqualified medics. Treatment the medical worker told us amounts to punishment.
In my view, it's the idea of total vulnerability. If you imagine being unable to move, being unable to see what's going on, that's something that borders, if not crosses, into psychological torture.
The Israeli military says prisoners are stripped for security checks and that investigations are opened when there's suspicion of misconduct. Still, accounts from Israelis and Palestinians inside and the shocking images paint a disturbing picture. Matthew Chance, CNN, at Sedi Taman.
I mean, Jesus. This is absolutely fucking disgusting. That this is the way they're treating all this. Yeah, this is what it's come down to now. Now, this was released yesterday, very early in the morning, at least with my time zone. But this is just... Hopefully this changes a lot, because again, this isn't just some independent reporter. This is CNN, who hasn't exactly been the best when it comes to covering Israel, definitely taking a centrist take, to say the least. But like, this expose, like explain everything that's fucking happened, should be very concerning. Hopefully it results in some change. I highly doubt it. But hopefully this wakes a lot more people up. Hopefully this leads to action being done onto Israel for how they've been covering all this, like how they've been handling all this. But God, like, and this again isn't new. like that new. We have heard of a lot of violence that have been done to prisoners in these Israeli like camps, but now we literally have whistleblowers coming out to detail some of the abhorrent shit that happens, and it's literally just the stuff that they've seen. It's like this is only a few things that we are being told of now. We have no idea how, like, all the other shit that could be happening to these people. Just disgusting. I don't even know what to say at this point. Like, I keep saying this almost every video that I talk about Israel Palestine now, but I keep hoping for things to get better, but we always see it to be worse and worse. It always just gets worse and worse, and it's because of our current president who refuses to do anything about it. Like, yeah, he paused military aid, but when he does that, and the Israeli prime minister literally comes out after that, and it's just like, or I think, no, he came out before it and said that even if that was to happen, because that was still it was still unsure of whether that was going to happen or not. He literally said, we're going to continue to do this. We don't care. We don't care if they pause aid. We are still going to do this. And then they did, and they're still doing it. So until Biden puts on his big boy pants and actually puts the hammer down and is like, no, we are literally going to make sure you stop doing this, or until someone actually does this, it's not going to happen. Oh yeah, there's also this guy that I talked about earlier. Furious Israel ambassador shreds UN charter before vote on Palestine membership. Israel's United Nations ambassador physically held a mock copy of the UN Charter into a shredder to illustrate what he said was the General Assembly's disregard for the document as delegates voted to advance Palestinian membership to the world body. The stunt came just before the General Assembly voted overwhelmingly for a resolution asking the Security Council to make Palestine, which has UN observer status, into a full member. A furious Israel ambassador, Gilad Erdan, invoking the Holocaust, World War II, and the October 7th Hamas attack, ripped his colleagues for wanting to advance the establishment of a Palestinian terror state led by the Hitler of our time. Jesus Christ. Earlier, Palestinian ambassador Riyad Mansour spoke with emotion about the death toll in Gaza and cited the anti-war protests at Columbia University as he implored the assembly to vote yes. In the face of a looming Israel invasion on Rafah, he said Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was ready to kill thousands more for his political survival. And that's true because, what's been going on with Gaza is very popular with the Israeli population. So him continuing forth with his genocide campaign is not just because of his bloodlust. I mean, it's definitely because of that too. It's also just, it's a great look for him in the eyes of Israelis. Like, it's insanely popular over there. So, just disgusting. Jesus. And I just don't know what else to say.